UK Bribery Act was the FCPA on steroids, right? So we're still waiting for the steroid to kick in, right? The UK Serious Fraud Office continues to promise a high dose of steroids, so we're not sure who the recipients would be. The act itself is fairly onerous. If you look at the UK Bribery Act, it prohibits private bribery, whereas the US Act was, public bribery. The UK Bribery Act also does not have, consistent with actually the law in India, the Prevention of Corruption Act, does not have a de minimis exception for grease payments or small payments, right? £2, £3. It does not have an exception. So that's much more onerous on that count. And the last count, which when the Bribery Act came into force, really caught a lot of companies unaware, was it has an obligation on companies to prevent bribery. So you not only does it prosecute just the mere act of improper payments, but the fact that you did not prevent itself constituted a crime under the act. So those three provisions really led to the FCPA on steroids. But like I said, enforcement so far has been fairly sporadic and random cases, I think mostly on individuals. It's still to be seen a very large prosecution on the UK Bribery Act. The good news in the UK Bribery Act, if at all one could call it good news, was the requirement of an adequate procedures. It was in vogue even in the US in the various sentencing guidelines, but the adequate procedures themselves have now been codified in the UK Bribery Act. And they're really very commonsensical. Nothing earth-shattering exists in the UN rules and in the US sentencing guidelines. So there are 6 principles. It's now neatly packaged in a box and gives compliance officers, CFOs, board of directors, at least a neat set of guidance one can look to. And that's the only critical piece, is the adequate procedures. So if the company has adequate procedures, and there are 6 of them, those then will enable the company to then claim legitimately that if they do have a rogue employee, right, so if you are running an operation of 100,000 employees, it's likely that despite years of training and risk assessment and having the right tone at the top and procedures and monitoring, some of your employees may still land up making improper payments, and the company's internal control systems may not detect it, particularly if that employee is a rogue employee. Then he's taken enough procedures to make sure that your controls do not detect them. So in that case, the only defense the company has is to say, look, I had a proper code of conduct, I had a proper tone at the top, we reinforced that tone through adequate training. We also implemented a control system. We undertook a bribery specific risk assessment. We looked at which of our businesses are more susceptible or vulnerable to the risk of bribery. We established controls in place, whether it's pre-approval. We set limits for gifts and other payments and de minimis payments. We had controls around cash. We routinely conduct audits, perhaps surprise periodic random audits. And despite all of that, if I have an employee, whatever may be the level of seniority in the organization, it could be the head of the division, he could be a clerk. Despite all of that, if that one individual turns out to violate the law, then it's only right that the individual is prosecuted and not the entire company, and not the corporate enterprise. So that's the only defense a company has as far as adequate procedures are concerned. And if I can take 2 minutes, James, I'm not sure if I have 2 minutes. If I look at the 6 principles, I'm not going to go through the principles, I'll just tell you the challenges one can face in India while implementing these procedures. The first principle is proportionate procedures, and all the Act says is combined with risk assessment, that you undertake a risk-based approach. I think even in the morning session there was the discussion around having a risk-based approach. So you don't have, if you have a business which only deals with other UK companies or other US companies, or if you're selling only to your parent, the risk in that business is far less than if you're selling to a government entity here in India, whether it's a state-owned entity like a public sector organization, or you're selling to divisions of the government. So your risk assessment is proportionate to the risk involved. The challenge in India, and particularly for companies in India who also have to comply with the UK Bribery Act if they have operations in the UK, is that the risk assessment tends to become more checklist based, more form over substance. The risk assessment doesn't tend to be regular. It doesn't consider the dynamic nature of their business. So if they have a UK branch or a company in India or a company in UK, and then they enter into a new joint venture in Uzbekistan, they have to update their risk assessment. So they can't say, well, I did the risk assessment when I had one entity in India and one in the UK, but if I now enter into, say, Nigeria or a country where the Transparency International score is far worse than either UK or India, which would typically be the case if it's Uzbekistan or Nigeria, you will need to redo your risk assessment. So you cannot wait and rely on your prior risk assessment. And that risk assessment has to be done closer to that event, and then tailor your controls to meet the risk assessment and the risk in that particular division. So your controls also will have to be tailored. So if you have, I think several companies in India particularly approach us and ask us that, look, I have a branch in the UK, and I know my UK branch is very compliant with UK law, but my headquarters is in India. I'm not so sure of other divisions in India whether they really comply. Will I still be covered under the UK Bribery Act? Or is it only my UK branch which would be covered under the UK Bribery Act? Then I'm home safe. But if you expand it beyond my UK branch to my branch in India and multiple divisions and locations in Sri Lanka or Nigeria, will that be covered? The regulators in the UK still haven't undertaken a prosecution to that effect. But if you read the Act, it's clear that all of these pieces are covered, right? And you really can't have an ethical branch in the UK and the rest of your entities not having the same ethical tone, and if your corporate office doesn't have that right ethical tone at the top, then it's unlikely that your branch is going to have the same level of ethics that you think they have just because they physically reside in the UK. So it becomes very critical to get the right set of leadership and the right set of expectations and realistic and pragmatic timelines when you're operating in India. I think on the flip side, when foreign companies enter India, one of the important questions is, can you even really do business in India? Is it worthwhile? Because the penalties could be significant, right? I mean, you're looking at penalties for violation of either the UK Bribery Act or the US Act in terms of prison time. So it's a very different risk comparison if you have, on the one hand, your prison time, and on the other hand, 5 billion in revenues. I mean, it's just not even a meaningful comparison. And in addition, you have individual penalties, both corporate and civil. So the question always comes that, can you do business in India? And there are companies who do business in India. There are lots of multinationals. I mean, you've seen, I think there are over 300 or 500 British companies operating in India, even with the HSBC survey. There's several American companies as well. And I think there are a couple of things they do right. The first thing they do is they have a very realistic expectation of how long it can take to establish a meaningful presence in India and for your venture to start making profits, right? So you could incorporate a company in a day in the UK or in the US. You could multiply it by 12 times, you would still not have that company incorporated in India. 100 times, it would still not be 100 days. So it really needs a reset. So many of them approach it as, if I could incorporate a business in one day, In Asia, it could be 100 days. So I've multiplied it by 100 times. I mean, what do you mean? You've gone to India and you're there for 100 days, 3 months, and you still haven't incorporated. So as a CEO, you would be trying to explain to them that 100 days, I still don't have the right form. I don't even know how many forms I need to complete and where do I have to submit. So 100 days is really nothing. In India, 100 days is business as usual, right? I mean, a quarter can go by, and I mean, you look at some of the acts, 1961 and 2008. Well, that's the time scale you're looking at. So it's important to set those realistic expectations that you cannot expect the division to roll out its first product and start making profits in 12 months. It may take you 10 months and 8,000 approvals to just get your testing production. So commercial production may be another 12 months. So those realistic expectations are very critical. And second is the tenacity and support from corporate office in terms of waiting it out. So there really is only two choices, that you wait, you comply with the law, you pay, but then you pay under duress, you pay under penalty, so your cash flow gets locked up. But you're waiting for that rather than you're taking shortcuts, right? So again, that means there needs to be support from your head office that you're going to lock up cash without showing profits because you want to get it right, and that sets a message to I think even the earlier panel they were talking about it in Thailand, that you wait for that first message to come in, and there are enough case studies of both companies in India as well as multinationals who have waited, who paid the penalty under duress, gone on to appeals, and after that first incident, that really defines the ethical compass of your company, not just for your own employees or customers, but to government officials. And even government officials, even down the chain, really doesn't, they don't bother you and the demands and asks, because they know you're not going to pay, and even their time is short. They're not going to waste time on companies you're never going to pay. And it's the same even on gifts. I know many companies struggle with, if you have a gift policy, I don't want to give a gift. I don't want to go with a company branded gift to a very senior public official, because he's going to expect something more valuable, say in the form of gold coins or laptops or iPhones, and I'm going with miniature product which has my branding. So you have a very nice gift, but it has your company logo. I mean, he really doesn't want. He wants stuff without the logo, right? So many companies do struggle with that, and I think several times we've seen both multinational companies and Indian companies who want to do business the right way pull in with the, say the UK IBC or the Chamber of Commerce, and they make a presentation or a token gift with a combined pool which comes from the chamber. So it still's got value, to the recipient, but then it's come from the chamber, which has a larger pool and you can have a larger amount, and that still fulfills your own gift policies. So there are ways, to overcome these challenges, and I think the key is to use your own Chamber of Commerce, in different locations, and join forces, because I know the American, Canadian, and the British Chamber of Commerce jointly make representations on, say aerospace and defense, on defense procurement offset issues, because those are very large contracts. So I mean, there are ways in which companies have done business, and I think a lot of Indian companies also have joined those chambers because they are operating in the US and the UK. So I think I'm going to stop right there.